welcome. You're listening to another podcast of Mothers War and Violence. We're here at 89.9 FM. WCBU is our sponsor. Tim Shelley is our producer. And I'm Yolanda Wallace, and I'll be your host. In today's world, there are many tragedies that happen, anywhere from auto-related deaths to suicide, murder, drowning, drug overdose, etc. In Peoria, Illinois, there have not been a program that acknowledged the survivors of a whole community since 2007 in Peoria, Illinois, and it was called the Parents of Murdered Children. It was actually a support group, and it met at the Methodist Hospital, and it was private for survivors community. And then the last leader of it was Ted and Suzette Simpson, who had the group ended up moving to Bloomington and Lake Lincoln, Illinois, and they still meet there once a month. And it is part of a national organization called the Parents of Murdered Children, founded by Charlotte and Bob Hullinger in Cincinnati, Ohio, in 1978, 3 months after their daughter died from injuries inflicted by her former boyfriend. And their mission statement of Parents of Murdered Children was to make the difference through ongoing emotional support, education, prevention, advocacy, and awareness. So they have been doing the Day of Remembrance for years before it was a legalized day for murdered children. In 2007, Congress designated September 25th as the National Day of Remembrance. And I attended those times. So it was legalized in 2007. My son was killed in 2006. And this is where I got the idea at. And as time went on, there were more tragedies happening in our community, and we didn't separate the grief of the survivors like sometimes we do. The National Parents of Murdered Children, it acknowledges your grief if you have lost someone in the military, if you lost someone in auto-related deaths or suicide or whatever. It's not just focused just towards gun violence survivors only. So we brought the program to Peoria in 2010. Our very first program, and the reason why we did was because I wanted everybody in the whole Peoria area to experience the Day of Remembrance, the acknowledgement of each survivor's loved one, and to give them emotional support and to heal our community, as well as back in 2006, I was fighting for the program ceasefire, and I had learned some things. So anyway, today on our show, I'd like to introduce to you a couple ladies who actually they assisted me with these things. So I didn't do all these things by myself. I had a team of people who did it and who supported, as well as speaker and the slideshow and all these things. And I just want to welcome Yvonne Fleming, who was one of our speakers of the National Day of Remembrance here in Peoria, Illinois, and Dr. Leslie McKnight into the studio. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Great. So now let's get started on, I did the Day of Remembrance from 2010 to 2014, and then I had to step down from my role because I needed some help, and I had turned it over to Yvonne Fleming. So the first year in 2010, it was at the Riverplex.
It was at the river.
Before we even knew we were going to have the John Buckley Memorial Garden, it was at the Riverplex, ironically. And then a couple years later, we end up being behind the Riverplex with the John Buckley Memorial Garden. And then the second year, we raised the money and we had it at the Gateway from 2011 to 2014, and then 2014 to 2018, Yvonne had it. So Yvonne, do you want to share with us what your role was and what you did with it and what you found and what your reasons were for being involved?
Thank you. Well, so my reasons for being involved was I had 2 tragedies that happened to me. The first one was my son was killed by his girlfriend in 2007. And then the second tragedy was my youngest son lost his father to a double homicide in 2010. I think it was 2010. And so that gave me the reason to participate. Well, I was participating in the beginning, but then I became like the host in the following years after Yolanda stepped down. And so the role that I played pretty much was finding someone to be a speaker for the event and trying to reach out to those that had lost loved ones due to violence, and then just have them to come and participate. And we had a variety of speakers during that time. So, and it made people more aware. And actually, it kind of like for the speakers, some of them, it made other people see them in a different light when they spoke of their tragedies that no one probably ever knew that had happened to them other than their immediate family.
Yes, that's so true. Even sometimes in dealing with the family, Yvonne, did you find it sometimes heavy on your heart? Because I found it heavy on my heart a lot of times dealing with the surviving families and trying to provide the services for them. What was that like for you?
Well, I think that any tragedy is always takes a piece out of you. And then when you're, watching someone else go through the same thing, that of course takes a piece away from you too. But when you're able to give them support and give them a little bit of guidance, it kind of, I think, eased the burden for everyone.
That is so true, because at our Day of Remembrance, we have information on grief and grieving, as well as other survivors being there and giving support. And it was kind of hard to, give the program over to anyone else but a survivor. That was one of the key components that I learned from the National Parents of Murdered Children when they would do the nationally recognized Day of Remembrance, which is really fairly new to our country, but they had been doing it prior to that, before it was legalized and acknowledged as a celebrated day for murder victims. And we did not do it by ourselves. We had Dr. Leslie McKnight, who at the time was a part of the city. And then I will let Leslie tell you how she got to know me and Yvonne and how we work with our city to create a day of serenity, a day for peace, and everything.
Yeah, so currently I am with the Peoria City County Health Department as the Director of Community Health. But back in 2004, 5-ish, I was with the City of Peoria as the Neighborhood Development Manager. And so what we were experiencing at the city was an uptick in violent crime, particularly homicides. And these homicides were occurring in our communities, and particularly the Black and brown communities. And it was the beginnings of a epidemic, because violence is an epidemic, and I've learned that term now. I'm at the health department, but at the city, I was just experiencing the uptick in homicides and the trauma that it was causing in our communities. And personally, the trauma it was causing in me, because I lost my brother. I'm from Chicago. In the late 90s, my brother, there was an act of violence by his girlfriend, and, he did not make it. So my own experience of living through that trauma and really not having the resources, not having any community recognition, it was just like it was your household and you had to deal with it. I was inspired by Yvonne and Yolanda, who were mothers, who were community members that, were experiencing the same trauma, but wanted to use that trauma to, in a positive light, to bring our community together, to recognize the love and the life of our friends and family and community members. So I was impressed to have a sense of urgency to respond. And so we came together, and Yolanda knew about the Day of Remembrance. She had went to experience the national conference and came back and said she wanted to do something in Peoria. So, of course, with everything, you need resources. So I was with the city, and so we got organized. We raised the funds that we needed to get the support. We got a venue, and instead of waiting, we did it. We did it, and the community responded. And so it was our opportunity to collectively grieve what had just happened to us as a community, but also come together for healing, for support, and for advocacy on prevention of not just gun violence, but violence in general that leads to death. And so again, it was the least I can do. I'm not a mother, but I haven't lost a child due to violence, but I can even imagine what our mothers are going through. But what I can do is to always be there and show my support.
Thank you, Leslie. Now, I want to say that even though you haven't lost a child, wouldn't you agree that losing a sibling, that there was some things that you had to go through that you had to heal from? I mean, we could not have a day of remembrance without thinking about our children, without those that are left behind. So how did you feel as a survivor yourself to help with this?
I now know what the word survivor really means, because when you lose someone that you love and you're connected with, you really are just trying to cope with life after losing them. And so many days you are just surviving. You're not necessarily living, you're surviving. And that takes courage, it takes strength, and it takes support. And so, yeah, you're right. And that never goes away.
No.
It never goes away. So the more we can be there for each other and be that support system, and when the times are hard, we all have someone to lean on, and then just having a recognition of life and how precious it is, the more we can start healing as a community.
That's funny that you would say community. Yvonne, how would you say that opposed to back then to now, how is our community? Do we have that same kind of community? I mean, in your own words.
Well, are you saying community support? Or?
Yes, community support.
So I think that that the community support, it's not like it was before. I think because with the Day of Remembrance, we were making awareness throughout the year, and now the only time that someone is or anyone is recognized is when there's a death.
Yeah.
And and they have their own silos of remembrance, and so the community doesn't come together to support that family. It's usually just a couple organizations maybe, but it's nothing like when it was the Day of Remembrance, because then you had the whole community coming together as one. So I do think that there could be more that's done within the city as far as support goes for the violence. And I think that the community, if everyone were to kind of maybe do their part, like when you see something, say something. I think that we would be able to resolve a lot of these unsolved crimes if we all kind of like just stepped up,
Right.
and did our part.
That's true. It's, you know what, I feel the same way about, hit and runs and stuff like that. And if someone's seen somebody doing something wrong, and I don't care if it was me or the next person, we should all be trying to report what we saw, to just because it's the right thing to do. I mean, I think that in today's world, we get so caught up of that's not none of my business and anything like that. Well, therefore, that means that we need to find ways to get back to doing the right thing, making the right choices to help somebody else. The other thing I like that we did with the Day of Remembrance, I enjoyed the walks that we had. Walking was therapeutic in our community, and I like that our, sometimes our law enforcement would be there and the clergy would be there for support and prayer. I mean, we had a few different, dynamics there that happened, but there was never a fight there. There was never anybody pulling any guns on anybody there, right?
No.
There was no violence there amongst us because we were all grieving, and we were there for that reason, a healing type of thing. Some of the families were saying how they wish the Day of Remembrance would come back because it gave them hope to carry on, to go on. And I'm finding out as I look around and some years later that that's one piece of our community that's missing, and that's the survivor's voice. We don't have enough survivors engaged in communities.
And that's one of the things that, I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm reminiscing on all of our events. And that's one of the things that touched me the most is that the event was truly for the survivors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we would have a keynote speaker that was a survivor.
Mm-hmm.
We would have survivors that would be a part of the program, whether they wanted to sing or write a poem or had a form of expression. We have families in the room that were just affected by violence, and they, had just started their grieving process. And we would be there to support them in real time, with those that, have had the Violence Act decades ago. And it was real. It was real all the time. And it helped all of us to get a little bit more of healing, regardless of what year we were impacted. So those were some really intimate moments as a community. And I agree with Yvonne that, we need to get back to those types of moments. Our community now is so polarized, and you feel you have to, choose one side or the other, is us or them. But, when it comes to the human and life condition and trauma, it affects us all.
It does.
Whether it's directly or indirectly. And so we need to be more intentional about, creating opportunities for us to come together and to celebrate life.
Now, you mentioned, Leslie, that you're with the health department now, and they're having, cure violence is what's going on right now. What do you see that to look like in today's world? Because we're decades later now.
Yes, and so Cure Violence is a violence intervention model that is community related, meaning that there are violence interrupters that are hired from the community with a lived experience. And they're the ones that are out in the community. They know, what's going on, if there's potential for violence, and they try to interrupt that. And in addition to that, there also is case management that provides that community support for resources that families that may need it. But it is very interrelated to the Day of Remembrance. And I would be interested to see, right now the health department is seeking a community organization to develop and to implement a Cure Violence program. But as part of that programming, I would be interested in working with this community agency to see if there could be a collective activities or platforms where the Mothers Against Violence and the Mothers War on Violence and other advocacy groups can come together and have events
For survivors.
for particularly for survivors. So it's more to come on that. We're anxious to see what organizations throw their hat in the ring and be very intentional about reducing violence in Peoria, but also, working to build the members of our community and to help support families. So we'll see, and I'm very interested in seeing what we can do to support all the efforts.
Awesome. And Yvonne, what's your take on it, on this Cure Violence today?
I don't know a lot about it,
Okay.
about the Cure Violence. I went to a couple of meetings, and so I'm anxious, as Leslie said, to see who send in, their information to want to do a program on stopping or on helping to cure this violence that we have going on to slow it down, or to even at one point maybe hopefully it could be diminished. But I'm anxious to see who's going to put their name out there to help with these programmings. And so I'd like to see how that goes too.
Good. And, me too. I've often thought about doing the Day of Remembrance, but it's a lot of work. And all three of us were volunteers, and this was on our time off from our regular jobs. And on top of that, we have another connection besides working on the Day of Remembrance, which was the neighborhoods. I was just started my neighborhood watch in 2007. Yvonne, you were over helping out with the Goose Lake Neighborhood Association, and then you became the Neighborhood Alliance person, right? After
I still am.
Oh, you still are? Okay. After, what was his name before you?
The Neighborhood Alliance. I'm not sure who the chair was at that time.
All right.
So.
Well, I know the one guy when I joined, it was the one guy who was over the East Bluff Community Center.
Oh, Jim Combs.
Jim Combs. And then after him, there was someone else. But anyway, and we had an awesome time. During our times of going on, our mayor at that time supported us going to neighborhood
Regional Neighborhood Network Conference.
Yeah, that's
The
thank you.
RNNC.
That's right. And
I was
Leslie,
just thinking about that the
you
other day.
were instrumental in doing that.
Yep.
The neighborhoods were involved.
They
Because
were.
this stuff that we have right here, the neighborhoods are not involved
You're right.
right now.
I
They're
did
not.
my job.
Leslie, I'm saying the neighborhoods are not involved.
You
I
are
mean, the most that the neighborhoods are involved is taking care of our own boundarified areas and doing the National Night Out Against Crime. In our Day of Remembrance that we had, when we would go on the neighborhood,
Network Conference.
thank you, RNNC, we also would go to other areas to bring back ideas to see if they played in Peoria. And the Day of Remembrance was one of those things as well. We had went to Cincinnati, Ohio, and Dayton, Ohio, for a couple of our RNNCs, and then we went to, is it Edwardsville?
We went to Champaign. We've had it.
Mm-hmm.
Champaign has hosted.
Yeah.
Kentucky has
Yep.
hosted.
Yep. There was another one in Indiana. I thought it was
Fort
Edwards.
Wayne.
It was Fort Wayne, Indiana. Yeah. And we actually brought back some ideas from there. I mean, and during one of our visits, I had already been in connection with the National Parents of Murdered Children when they had a support group here, which is how I found out some things. But then as time went on and the meeting began to be harder, going over to Bloomington and Lincoln for the meeting, then we knew that we had to do something here. So one of our trips, we went over there, and we had Lavetta Ricca and some of everybody who was involved in the Neighborhood Alliance, right? And we went and found these things and brought them back. And so in one of our trips going to Cincinnati, Ohio, I went to an actual live Day of Remembrance. And there they had it. So we pretty much had it down packed in Peoria because I had already seen these things there. So our whole community was involved. The neighborhood, law enforcement, city council.
That's correct. And I have to get a shout out. Hopefully he hears this to
Yes.
Councilman Eric
Turner.
We could not have done
No.
this without his support.
No.
Point blank. And
And
he
even
lobbied
with the
for
Memorial
us.
Garden, we couldn't
Yes.
we couldn't have got that either without
Yes.
his help. So
He was a key team member, and he was invested personally and as an elected official.
Yep.
And so he
And
kept
there's a lot of
this relevant.
volunteerism stuff going
Yes.
on. I mean,
Yes.
and he could go, our city council person that was appointed to us at that time went and found money for us to go and do these things, right, Yvonne? And
Right.
to bring things back.
Yes.
And even to have Peoria be a host.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
Peoria's
We have even
hosted
hosted it.
the
And
RNC
I have
twice.
to give another shout out to Councilman Ryan Spain as well.
Exactly.
Because he
Yeah.
led our fundraising
That's
effort.
right. Yes, he did.
So those, you have me reminiscing over here.
Oh, yeah.
These were some great times.
It was the whole community
It was a
tied
whole community,
in to,
and we all did what we could
Mhm.
to help each other, and I miss that.
yes,
It was good.
That's the community part that is missing. And don't forget about Chuck Weaver and what his part and what he did to help
He
and
did
make
too.
sure that we had
Yeah,
buses
we had
and
transportation.
to get back and forth. Of course, we had, Rachel Parker, who was, what was she
Right.
doing at that time?
She was on the county board.
She was on the county board. And though all those things helped us to be a better community. We were working as a community. And we still work with the health department as well at that time,
Yes.
but on a more community level
Right.
than, right now. I mean, I'm not saying anything bad about the health department right now, Leslie, but I'm just saying we're working in a different capacity with the community. We're still working with the community, but in a different way.
Yeah, and and to that point, you are right. We could enhance the grassroots community part,
Right.
but a dynamic that's going on. I have to say this, and I have to give the last shout out to another elected official, Representative Jehan Gordon Booth,
Oh, yeah.
who has been a major advocate
was.
of bringing, even today, of bringing in state resources to build the infrastructure for not just violence intervention, but violence prevention. And so there's these frameworks that are out in our community now. And so we're trying to bring in substantial resources, substantial programs. But again, and Yvonne and Yolanda can attest to it, what the heart of all of this is the community.
It's missing right now.
And
That's
so,
the one thing that we all three agree that is missing. And so somehow, some kind of way, I wish there was a way that we could pull together grassroots organizations, because I still think the grassroots organizations are still part of the solution to help our community, as Mothers War on Violence, and these other programs. There's, different, other advocacy programs here, because Mothers War on Violence isn't the only one. However, as far as survivors, there's just not a whole lot of programs that are like ours. But anyway, I want to thank you, listening audience, for listening to another podcast of Mothers War on Violence. And I thank you, Dr. Leslie McKnight and Miss Yvonne Fleming, for all your efforts in the past and the things that you're still doing to this day. And I hope we can bring back the RNNC to get other communities involved, to give us more ideas. Of course, we got some new things happening now that weren't happening before. We have more arts in the city, right? So that is awesome. And thank you for listening to another podcast of Mothers War on Violence. This is Yolanda Wallace, your host. You're listening to 89.9 FM.